You are about to enter a realm where thought unravels itself, not with violence, not with noise, but with silence sharp enough to cut through certainty. A whisper that dismantles empires built in your mind. You've walked through life thinking you knew what was real. You've trusted time, memory, logic, even self. But beneath every step you've taken, there's been a floor of mirrors each, one reflecting a version of truth that vanishes the moment you try to hold it still. This is not a lecture. This is not a philosophy class. This is a quiet undoing.m. Unraveling of the structures you never thought to question. Why memory feels real even when it lies. Why freedom only exists inside limits. Why your sense of identity might be a loop pretending to be a line. Here, you will meet thought experiments that think back. Contradictions that don't cancel each other but coexist. Ideas that break themselves. In front of you, not to be understood, but to be felt like a weight slipping off your shoulders. For the next 3 hours, you won't be told what to think. You will watch thinking watch itself. You will hear silence speak. And you might even notice how each question devours its own answer before it ever reaches your lips. Let the clock dissolve. Let labels lose their meaning. Let identity fade just for a little while. You are not here to learn. You are here to remember what you've always known beneath the noise. That the mind is not a container for truth, but a stage for illusions so convincing. They became you. Close your eyes or keep them open. Lean back. Breathe slowly. Let the voice guide you inward, not toward meaning, but toward the beautiful collapse of needing it. And remember this, some games were never meant to be won, only played, until you forget you were playing at all. You trust your memories because they feel like anchors, solid, stable, personal. But what if they aren't? Imagine you're walking through a familiar street in your childhood neighborhood. The cracked pavement, the smell of bread from a nearby window, the rusted swing set in the distance. You think you're remembering it, reliving it, even, but you're not. You're inventing it. Right now, neuroscience has shown that every time you recall a memory, your brain doesn't simply play back a recording. It rebuilds the event from scratch, combining fragments of emotion, scattered images, and the present moment's interpretation. The more often you revisit a memory, the less it resembles the original. You're not remembering the memory, you're remembering the last time you remembered it. This means your past is being rewritten by your present, what you felt, what you needed, what you now believe. They all slip quietly into the foundation of the memory you once thought was pure. Think of the Lost in the Mall experiment, where researchers implanted false childhood memories into participants' minds, just by suggestion, just by asking them to imagine. And the brain, hungry for a narrative, complied. It stitched fiction into fact, belief into experience. So, how much of your life is real? And how much is just a comforting story you've edited? To fit your identity? Maybe the version of your past that you carry with you is a fiction written by your need for coherence. A myth you update with each passing year. A novel ghostwritten by your fears, your biases, and your desire to be someone worth remembering. Now, try to remember your first heartbreak. What clothes were you wearing? What did the room smell like? Was it raining? Are you sure? Memory is a painter, not a camera. It doesn't record, it creates. And every creation changes the creator. So if your memories define who you are, but your memories are rewritten each time you recall them, who are you really? A story told by a storyteller that forgets how it ends. A past that only exists because you believe it does until you don't. You think in words. You fill your head with language, noise, inner narration, but beneath every thought, there is silence, and without that silence, thought cannot begin. We believe thinking is the sound of the mind, a mental chatter. A stream of consciousness pouring endlessly through our heads. But thought doesn't grow from sound. It grows from the space between. Every sentence you speak is framed by silence. Every idea begins with a pause, a moment before the word arrives. Without that gap, that stillness, there would be no shape. To the noise, it would be nothing but static dot. This is the paradox. Silence is not the absence of thought. It is its birthplace. Consider the meditation studies done on long-term practitioners. Their brains show increased activity not when they are thinking, but when they are not. When they are silent internally and externally, their brains begin to reorganize. The default mode network, that endless self-referential chatter, begins to quiet, and in that quiet, a deeper awareness emerges. One that does not rely on language, memory, or identity. This means that the clearest thoughts do not scream. They whisper. Or don't speak at all. Think of the moments when truth has struck you, not with words, but with presence. A feeling in the chest. A stillness behind the eyes. A moment where everything made sense, but nothing needed to be said. Silence isn't empty. It's full of potential. Full of meaning not yet born. Like a canvas before the first BRUSHSTROKE dot. So what if all your searching, your effort to think harder, explain deeper, has been blocking the very clarity you seek? What if silence is the teacher? The answer: you've been talking over all your life. And here's the loop. The more you chase thought, the less it reveals. But when you let silence take its shape, thought arrives fully formed. Not as noise, but as knowing, a knowing that can't be spoken, only felt, only remembered after everything else is quiet. You crave freedom, the absence of boundaries, the right to choose, move, speak, and think without interruption. You imagine it as infinite space, a wide open sky with no edges, no rules, no fences. But total freedom doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like drowning. Give a person absolute choice, and you don't create peace. You create paralysis. This is called the tyranny of choice, studied by psychologist Barry Schwartz. When offered too many options, people become anxious, uncertain, and ultimately dissatisfied, even if they choose well. The more doors available, the more afraid you become of choosing the wrong one. You start to fear regret more than you desire freedom. So here's the paradox. Freedom without structure becomes chaos. And chaos is not freedom. It's disintegration. A river needs banks to flow. A mind needs form to think. A life needs direction. Or else it becomes a spiral of unfinished dreams and abandoned roads. The ancient Stoics knew this. To them, true freedom wasn't doing whatever you wanted. It was being free from what wanted you. Free from impulse, distraction, fear. They chose discipline not as limitation, but as a container where meaning could grow. Even your body obeys limits. Breath follows rhythm. Sleep follows cycle. Thought follows focus. The moment you remove the walls entirely, the structure collapses. And so does the self that lived within it. So why do you fear limits? Maybe because you think they're prisons. But maybe they're doors. Freedom is not the absence of walls. It's the ability to move between them with purpose, without being pulled by every desire, without falling into every endless possibility. And here's the loop. You are most free not when you can do anything, but when you know exactly what not to do. Structure is not the enemy of freedom. It is its shape, its ground, its form. Without it, freedom becomes just another cage, one made of infinite options and nothing real. You wake up each morning and slide back into a name, a role, a personality carefully stitched together by memory and habit. You call it you. But the more closely you examine it, the more it vanishes. Who are you when you're not performing? Not reacting, not remembering. The brain loves identity. It makes the world simpler. You are a student, a thinker, an artist, an introvert. But none of these are stable. They're masks that change with the room, the company, the hour, and the one wearing the mask is just another mask. This is the foundation of self-schema theory in psychology. You carry multiple selves, each triggered by a context. You become who the moment demands. And yet, you believe there's one true version beneath it all. But when you search for that core, there's nothing solid. Only echoes of things you've done, said, felt, and the mind stitching them into a story after. The fact. In Buddhist philosophy, this illusion of a permanent self is called anatta, the doctrine of no self. Not that you don't exist, but that you don't exist the way you think you do. You are not a thing. You are a process. A flame pretending to be a candle dot. So here's the paradox. The self that tries to observe itself changes in the act of observing. Like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. Like trying to bite your own teeth. You are the observer and the observed. The thinker and the thought. But never both at once. And as soon as you declare, I am this, you kill everything you are not, forgetting that what you are is always in motion, always dissolving, always becoming. You are not the voice in your head. You are the space that hears it, and that space cannot be named, because naming it makes it vanish. You were taught to seek truth, as if it sits at the top of some grand staircase, waiting patiently to be revealed. But what if the truth is the best disguise a lie can wear? Every belief you hold feels true, because it fits. It fits your past, your emotions, your fears, your tribe. It feels familiar. And familiarity, to the brain, feels like truth. This is known as the illusion of explanatory depth, the confidence we carry about things we barely understand. Ask someone how a zipper works or how they know their political views are right, and you'll hear fluent explanations until you press. Until the surface cracks and reveals how little is underneath. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we need them to be. Truth becomes a servant to identity, and lies slip in, dressed in logic and comfort. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned us, convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. Because a lie is obvious when it's naked, but a lie wearing truth, that becomes belief. And belief is sacred. You'll defend it. You'll kill for it. You'll never even question where it came from. Because it feels real. But here's the paradox. The moment something feels too true, too clean, too perfect, it deserves suspicion. Reality is messy. Truth is uncomfortable. It unsettles. It contradicts. It shifts. And yet, we prefer the polished version, the story that wraps up nicely, that confirms our view, that makes us feel right. So, what if your deepest truths are just the most convincing lies? What if certainty is the enemy and doubt the doorway? The more you chase truth, the more it hides behind your need for it, until you mistake the map for the territory, the mirror for the face. You don't arrive at truth by grabbing it. You arrive by letting go of everything that claimed to be it, and when the silence returns, after the noise of belief, after the crumbling of certainty, what remains may not be truth, but it will finally be real. You've been told that doing something, anything, is the cure. That movement is clarity. That forward is the answer. But sometimes the more you act, the more stuck you become. Have you ever tried to fall asleep by trying harder? To be creative by forcing ideas? To be calm by commanding yourself to relax? It doesn't work. Because certain states of being cannot be achieved through effort. They arrive when effort is released. This is the paradox. The moment you interfere with the flow, you break it. The act of trying becomes the obstacle, like stepping into a stream to capture its shape and scattering it instead. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called it flow state, a condition of complete absorption where time vanishes, ego dissolves, and everything just clicks. But here's the twist. You can't force flow. You have to fall into it. You must become the act itself, not the one trying to perform it. Athletes know this. Musicians, writers, dancers, they describe moments when they disappear into the motion, where the thinking stops and the doing does itself. But when you try to control that moment, you lose it. You become self-conscious, aware, separate, and the flow collapses into clumsy fragments. It's the same in life. We often act not from presence, but from panic, from the need to fix, to escape, to prove. And in that frantic motion, we disconnect from the deeper rhythm already happening beneath us. So maybe action is not always the answer. Maybe sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop doing. Step back. Allow. Not because you've given up, but because you've gotten out of your own way. You don't push the river, you flow with it. You don't beat the heart. It beats you, and maybe the stillness you've been avoiding was the motion you were searching for all along. You tighten your grip because you're afraid to lose it. Control gives you safety, or at least the illusion of it. You plan, manage, organize, monitor. You try to hold everything together, just a little tighter. But what happens when your grip becomes the very thing that breaks what you're trying to hold? This is the paradox of control. The more you try to control reality, the more unstable it becomes. The very act of forcing stability introduces chaos. Psychologists call this the paradox of control, especially in anxiety studies. When people fear losing control, they overcorrect. They micromanage their surroundings, their feelings, even their thoughts. But this overcontrol backfires. The brain becomes hypervigilant, scanning constantly for threats, creating stress where there was none, amplifying danger through attention alone. Your attempt to create order becomes the source of disorder. Systems collapse not from external pressure, but from internal rigidity. It's like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more it escapes. And so it goes in relationships, in art, in thought. You try to control love, and it dies. You try to control creativity, and it dries up. You try to control your mind, and it rebels. Chaos doesn't arise from lack of control. It often comes from the excess of it. And here's the loop. The world is already dancing. Your job was never to choreograph it, only to join the rhythm without stepping on its toes. There's a kind of surrender that isn't weakness, but wisdom. Letting go doesn't mean losing power. It means trusting that some things are more stable when left to move freely. The mind wants control because it fears the unknown. But some of the most beautiful things in life, growth, connection, discovery, only happen when you loosen your grip, when you step back and let the chaos breathe. You believe choice equals freedom. The more options, the more power. You walk into life's buffet with confidence, thinking every new possibility is a gift. But something strange happens when you stare at too many doors. You freeze. This is called choice overload, and it's not just a feeling, it's a measurable psychological effect. When given a handful of options, people choose quickly, confidently, and feel satisfied. But when the number grows even slightly, they hesitate, they doubt. They walk away with less happiness, more regret, and the haunting sense that they could have chosen better. Here's the paradox. More choice doesn't mean more freedom. It means more pressure, more fear, more imagined versions of the life you didn't pick. Every choice you make kills 1,000 other lives you might have lived. And the more possibilities you have, the heavier the weight of that loss becomes. It's not just in shopping aisles or job offers. It's in identity, in love, in purpose. Modern life tells you to be everything. Reinvent yourself constantly. Be flexible, be curious, be limitless. But in trying to become everything, you become nothing for long enough to matter. In existential philosophy, this is known as the burden of freedom, a state where endless possibility leads not to joy, but despair. Because to choose anything deeply, you must first reject everything else. And we don't like rejection, not even of imaginary futures. So we stay hovering, scrolling, or waiting about lives we'll never touch because we refuse to shut any door completely. But here's the loop. You are not free until you commit, until you choose one path deeply enough to let all the others die. Freedom isn't found in limitless wandering. It's found in planting yourself in a direction and growing roots so deep that doubt can't follow you anymore, because choice isn't freedom. Until you stop needing more of it, you search for knowledge like it's a ladder, each fact a rung, each insight a step upward toward clarity. You think the more you learn, the more you'll know. But what if knowledge isn't the same as knowing? What if the accumulation of facts blinds you to truth? In Zen Buddhism, there's a concept called beginner's mind, a state of openness where you don't assume, expect, or rush to explain. But as you gather knowledge, something shifts. You replace curiosity With certainty, you stop seeing things as they are and start seeing them as your mind already decided they must be. This is the paradox. The more you know, the less you're capable of seeing what you don't know. The mind begins to protect its structure. It filters out contradictions. It favors familiarity over possibility. It becomes a library too proud to make space for a new book. And science knows this too. Cognitive biases like confirmation bias or the Dunning-Kruger effect show how knowing a little can make you think you know a lot. And knowing a lot can make you dismiss the simple truths that don't fit your theories. You begin to confuse the map of the territory, the explanation for the experience, the label for the thing itself. You can read 1,000 books on love and never understand it, like someone who's had their heart broken in silence. You can study consciousness for decades and still be confused by the awareness staring out of your own eyes, because some truths are not reached by analysis. They are absorbed through presence, through direct experience that refuses to be named. So here's the loop. Knowledge builds a structure, but that structure becomes a wall, and real knowing, it happens when the wall crumbles, when you drop the answer, when you meet life with the raw confusion of someone finally brave enough to say, I don't know. And in that moment, you do. You think you're being rational. You lay out your arguments, weigh your options, speak with precision. You believe your choices are guided by logic, reason, intelligence. But look closer, and you may see a puppet show with emotion pulling the strings behind the curtain. This is the paradox. You feel first, then justify. Psychologists call this affective realism, the phenomenon where your emotional state shapes what you perceive as real. If you're anxious, the world feels dangerous. If you're angry, people seem hostile. And when you make decisions, your brain often chooses emotionally, then retroactively builds a logical story to explain it. You're not lying. You're just editing. Antonio Damasio's famous research on brain-damaged patients showed that people who lost access to emotion couldn't make basic decisions. What to wear, what to eat, where to go. They could analyze all the facts endlessly. But without emotion, nothing mattered, because logic doesn't tell you what's important. Emotion does. Even in philosophy, David Hume declared centuries ago, reason is the slave of the passions. But we keep pretending it's the other way around. We dress up feelings in facts, wrap desire in data, and convince ourselves that our beliefs are conclusions, not cravings. You believe you chose that job because it made sense, but maybe it made you feel safe. You believe you ended that relationship because it was rational, but maybe it just hurt too much to stay. Emotion is a shapeshifter. It wears the mask of reason and speaks in its voice. So here's the loop. The more you try to be purely logical, the more blind you become to what's really moving you. True clarity doesn't come from silencing emotion. It comes from recognizing its shape, its grip, its voice beneath your words. And when you see how much of your reason was really just refined feeling, you begin to think differently. Not colder, but clearer. Because real logic doesn't deny emotion. It listens to it without letting it drive blindly. You watch yourself, you analyze, you reflect. You believe that by observing your mind, you can understand it, even control it. But the moment you observe, you change what you see. This is not just poetry. It's physics. In quantum mechanics. The observer effect shows that the act of measurement alters the state of what's being measured. A particle behaves differently when you look at it, and your consciousness does the same. You sit down to meditate, to notice your thoughts. But now that you're noticing them, they're not the same. They're cleaner, more performative, shaped by the very awareness trying to be neutral. You journal your emotions, and suddenly they sound poetic. You reflect on your behavior and end up rewriting the past. Because your inner eye doesn't just record, it edits. This is the paradox. To see yourself clearly, you must look. But the moment you look, you disturb the stillness you hope to understand. It's like trying to capture your own reflection. In rippling water, the gaze itself creates the ripple. Even in psychology, Self-observation alters mood, memory, and choice. We are actors adjusting to the audience, even when the audience is within dot. So who is the real you? The one acting? The one observing? Or the awareness of both? Here's the loop. You believe you are becoming more self-aware, but sometimes you're just creating a more polished version of yourself to look at dot. The ego doesn't disappear under observation. It adapts. It hides in the mirror, and sometimes what looks like insight is just performance with better lighting dot. So how do you know what's real? Maybe you don't. Maybe you just notice that the more you search for the authentic self, the more layers you find. Each one watching the one below, each one reshaping the story, until all that's left is the watching. Not of something, but watching itself. You see time as a line, past behind you, future ahead. A steady march forward, 1 second after another. A clean, predictable rhythm that governs all things. But time isn't what it seems. You remember moments not in order, but by meaning. You experience hours that feel like minutes that stretch like eternities. You revisit memories that feel closer than yesterday, and forget entire days that technically just happened. This is not just feeling, it's structure. Your brain doesn't store time like a clock. It stores it like a mirror hall, where moments reflect and echo off one another. Psychological time is elastic. Studies in neuropsychology show that time is shaped by emotion, attention, novelty. A boring commute feels longer than a full day of travel. Trauma distorts sequence. Joy collapses duration. This is the paradox. Time is not something you move through. It's something you construct. And because you construct it, you also reflect it. When you feel stuck in life, time slows down. When you're overwhelmed, it speeds up. When you're lost in thought, time disappears altogether. And the illusion of linearity breaks down dot in trauma therapy. They speak of time loops when the mind replays a moment so vividly that it becomes now again. The past is not behind you. It's happening again and again inside the theater of the present dot. So what is time really? A measurement? A sensation? A metaphor for change? And if you are the one reflecting it, what does that make you? A mirror pretending to be a traveler? A ripple pretending to be a river? Here's the loop. You try to master time. Manage it. Save it. But the more you try, the more you feel enslaved. By it running out of time. Wasting time. Lost in time. But maybe the trick isn't to control time. It's to collapse it. To realize that all of it, past, present, future, is happening now. Inside you, around you. Through you dot in time isn't passing. It's reflecting. You fear the dark, you seek the light. You treat them as opposites, as enemies. But what if they are not separate at all? What if every light you follow casts a longer shadow behind you? This is the paradox. The brighter the light, the deeper the darkness it creates. You chase enlightenment, clarity, self-awareness. You climb toward what you believe is the good, but never notice that in doing so, you cast away the parts of yourself that don't fit the narrative in psychology. Carl Jung called this the shadow self, the hidden side of your personality. The feelings, instincts, desires you push into the dark because they don't align with who you want to be. But shadows don't disappear when you ignore them. They grow, and the more you identify with being the light, the more you become blind to the damage you do in its name. You justify cruelty as justice, arrogance as clarity. Control as discipline. Even your highest ideals can become prisons. Because anything not seen is not integrated. In therapy, healing often begins not by adding more light, but by entering the dark. By sitting with grief, with anger, with shame, not to destroy them, but to understand them, to invite the shadow in as part of the whole, not as a flaw, but as a forgotten teacher. And here's the loop. You run from your shadow, not realizing that the light you carry is what keeps it alive. To dissolve the shadow, you must stop running. You must turn around and let it meet your eyes, because only then does the light stop being a spotlight. And start becoming a lantern. You are not here to escape your darkness. You are here to hold it, and in doing so, you may finally understand. Shadow doesn't hide the truth. It reveals the part of you that's still waiting to be seen. You believe in progress, improvement, the upward curve of becoming better, smarter, stronger, day by day dot. But what happens when your obsession with growth becomes the very thing that stops you from actually growing? This is the paradox. The more you focus on becoming, the further you drift from being. In psychology, this shows up in toxic self-improvement loops, where the pursuit of fixing yourself becomes a lifelong chase through books, diets, productivity hacks, and spiritual practices. But no matter how far you go, it's never enough. There's always one more level, one more version of you waiting at the end of the next routine. And because growth becomes your identity, stagnation feels like death. Stillness feels like failure. But real growth is not always expansion. Sometimes it's contraction. Sometimes it's rest. Sometimes it's letting go of the very identity you worked so hard to build. Trees don't grow taller in winter. They deepen their roots, silently, invisibly. Your mind needs the same, but we don't like what can't be measured. We want results, transformation that shows. So we push harder, think more, optimize, hustle, until the process becomes performance and the growth becomes noise. This is known as over-efforting in cognitive science, when the attempt to improve a skill interferes with its natural unfolding. You overthink, you overcorrect. You interrupt your own instincts, like a child trying too hard to fall asleep. Like a flower trying to bloom faster by pulling on its petals. Here's the loop. You grow most when you stop trying to grow. When you surrender your timeline, when you stop reaching and start receiving dot, and ironically, the fastest path forward is sometimes to sit down and feel where you already are. Because growth is not a climb, it's a cycle. A spiral, a dance between movement and stillness, becoming and being. And the moment you stop needing to grow is the moment you realize you already have. You think to remember, to solve, to understand. You believe thought is a tool, sharp, reliable, yours. But have you noticed how slippery it is? You have a profound insight in the shower, a sudden solution before falling asleep. And then it's gone, vanished as if it never existed. You search for it in the same mind that created it, but all you find is the outline of a ghost. This is the paradox. Thought cannot hold itself. Your mind is not a container, it's a current. Ideas pass through, not stay. Even neuroscience confirms this. Working memory, the mental space where thoughts are temporarily held, is extremely limited. Around 4 items, give or take. Anything more, and the mind begins to drop pieces, like a juggler with too many balls in the air. You try to think harder, to hold tighter, but thought resists captivity. It flows, fragments, folds in on itself. And the irony is, the more significant a thought feels, the more likely it is to disappear. Because strong emotion activates distraction. Your brain lights up and then burns out. And yet you keep trying to trap thoughts, to build castles of logic in a river of impermanence. You write them down, memorize, repeat, but what you're really doing is archiving the echo, not the experience itself, because thought, like breath, was never meant to be stored. Only witness dot, so here's the loop. You think to remember, but the act of thinking makes memory dissolve. You grasp for clarity, but the grasping scatters the shape you reached for. And still, you return, thought after thought, chasing certainty. In a system built on forgetting, maybe clarity doesn't come from holding thought, but from watching it go, without resistance, without attachment, like clouds passing through the sky, each one real for a moment, and then gone, and not lost, just finished. You want something, a feeling, a person, a future. And the moment you want it, it feels real, alive, urgent, powerful, but then you get it, and it dissolves. What happened? This is the paradox. Desire is most alive when it's unfulfilled. The closer you get to it, the more it disappears. Neuroscience has a name for this: dopamine prediction error. Your brain fires not when the reward arrives, but when you anticipate it, when you imagine it, want it. Crave it dot once it's yours, the chemistry drops, the spark fades, and desire begins to shift quietly, subtly to something else. This is why chasing pleasure can feel endless. Because what you truly want isn't the thing, it's the wanting itself. Desire gives you motion, direction, meaning. But when the object of desire is reached, you're left with a silence you didn't prepare for. So you chase again. A better version, a higher level, a deeper love, a brighter future. And each time the story repeats, the hunger fills you, the goal drives you, the moment arrives. And then it ends. The Buddhists called this tanha, thirst. Not just for things, but for experience, for self, for becoming. And they saw that suffering begins not with pain, but with craving. Because craving cannot sit still. And it cannot be satisfied. Here's the loop. You want something to feel whole. You get it. And the moment you do, a new gap opens up. Desire consumes its own fulfillment. Like a fire that eats what it burns. So maybe the answer is not to stop desiring, but to see it clearly. To know its shape. To ride its wave without believing it will deliver peace. Because peace does not come after desire. It comes in the moment. You stop needing desire to save you. And in that stillness, you realize the thing you were chasing was the chase itself. You use words to understand the world, to label, to share, to make sense of everything too large, too fast, too raw. But what if every word you use bends the truth it tries to capture? This is the paradox. Language helps you see and blinds you at the same time. A tree becomes tree. A feeling becomes grief. A moment becomes failure or success. But before the word, it was just experience. Raw, alive, unnamed. And once you name it, you limit it. You carve it out of the flow of reality and place it in a box built from past meanings. In linguistics, this is called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The idea that language shapes perception. If your language has no word for a concept, you may never notice it. If your language splits one thing into many, like snow or love or time, your mind begins to see the world through those divisions. And those divisions become real. Not because they are, but because you speak them into being. Even your sense of self is wrapped in language. The I that watches, remembers, decides is an idea built from pronouns and patterns. But what were you? Before words, a child doesn't feel sad. They cry. A bird doesn't think danger. It flees. Language adds distance. It abstracts. It gives you power over things, but also removes you from them. Here's the loop. You try to describe truth, but every word you choose cuts away what cannot be said. And yet, you keep speaking because silence, while true, is unbearable. So you name. You divide, you simplify, but maybe truth is not something to explain. Maybe it's something to return to once the words fall away, like waking from a dream of definitions and remembering you were always the thing itself, not the name for it. You try to be present, to live in the now, to ground yourself in what's real, what's immediate. You breathe, you observe. You return to the moment, but in doing so, something slips away. This is the paradox. The more present you become, the more you feel what isn't here. Silence brings awareness, but also reveals what used to fill the silence. Stillness gives clarity, but also exposes the empty spaces where meaning once lived. You sit alone in a room and try to be here, and suddenly, you feel everything that's not. The lover who left, the version of you that didn't make it, the future that hasn't arrived, the ache of absence made visible by attention itself, because presence doesn't erase emptiness. It reveals it. This is known in grief therapy as shadow presence. Becomes a presence, becomes of its own. You feel them in the space they no longer fill, in the chair they don't sit in the silence after their name. Presence is not always peace. Sometimes it's mourning. Even in meditation, people report that moments of deep stillness bring not serenity, but sorrow. Because for the first time, there is no noise to protect them from what's been waiting. And here's the loop. You seek presence to escape pain. But presence is what finally allows the pain to speak. You cannot be fully here without also being fully aware of what is no longer here. And maybe that's the truth presence offers. Not a relief from absence, but a doorway into it, because what you are missing is not always a flaw in the moment. Sometimes it's the very thing that shows you how real the moment is. And when you stop trying to fill the gap, you see, absence is not the enemy of presence. It is its shadow and where one stands. The other waits. You are aware that you are reading, aware that you are thinking, aware that behind the thought, something is watching. And so you turn to it. You turn toward awareness itself. Not what you're aware of, but the awareness doing the seeing. And as you look inward, a strange thing happens. Awareness begins to fold. It reflects. It loops. Like a camera pointed at a mirror, pointed back at itself. Infinite copies spiraling into themselves, each one containing the last. You notice a thought. Then you notice yourself noticing the thought. Then you notice that you're noticing that you're noticing. And suddenly you're no longer thinking, you're spinning. The mind turns on itself like a snake eating its own tail. It was searching for something, clarity, truth, self, but all it found was its own reflection, staring back, endlessly echoing. This is the paradox. The more aware you become, the more awareness traps itself. What begins as mindfulness turns into a maze. You watch your thoughts, but then judge them. You observe your reactions and react to what you observe. You try to remain still and grow tense in the trying. The very act of being aware becomes a performance. Awareness pretending to be natural, spontaneous, pure, but it isn't. It's layered now, self-conscious, divided, the observer and the observed, the seer and the seen. And every time you try to peel away the illusion, you reveal another layer that's also pretending to be the real thing. Philosophers and mystics have circled this loop for centuries. In Advaita Vedanta, they ask, who is the one who is aware? And then they ask, who is aware of that awareness? And then again, who is aware of the one who is aware of that awareness? Not to find an answer, but to exhaust the question. To reach the point where the mind can no longer fold inward without unraveling, where awareness, tired of chasing itself, finally dissolves into silence. In modern neuroscience, they speak of the default mode network, the part of the brain most active when you are doing nothing, when you are thinking about yourself, reflecting, replaying, projecting. It creates the story of you. But when you meditate, when you step out of that loop, the network quiets. Identity loosens. Awareness remains. But no longer needs to point at itself, and yet we keep turning inward. Not out of vanity, but out of curiosity. Who am I? What is this feeling? What is thinking? What is awareness? But awareness cannot observe itself cleanly. It always distorts. Like an eye trying to see itself without a mirror, or a knife trying to cut itself, or a fire trying to burn itself. And so the loop continues. You seek to witness your own witnessing, but in the witnessing, the witness changes. This is the loop of metacognition, thinking about thinking. It's what separates humans from animals, sages from seekers, philosophers, from the content. But it's also what traps you in spirals of self-doubt, overanalysis, and paralysis. You think so much about how you're thinking that you forget to simply be. Awareness becomes obsession. Mindfulness becomes manipulation. You aren't just aware, you're aware of how well you're doing awareness. And in that effort, the purity is gone. You meditate, trying to return to the present. But now you're judging the quality of your meditation. You ask, am I present now? And just in the asking, you're pulled away from presence. Because the question requires a subject, a self, a division. Awareness of awareness creates distance. And that distance keeps you from arriving. So what's the escape? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe escape is the wrong direction. Maybe the goal is not to break the loop, but to let it soften. To notice without needing to follow. To be aware without constantly reaching back to check that you are. Because the loop only tightens when you pull on it. But when you let go, awareness stops spinning. It rests. It breathes. It becomes less of a spotlight and more of an open sky. You don't need to find the end of awareness. You need only to stop climbing through its reflections. Let the mirror be. Let the eye turn outward. Let the fire warm you instead of trying to hold it. And in that quiet, beneath all the loops, beneath the spiral of cells and watchers and narratives, something simple returns. Just seeing. Just being. No one doing it. No one needing to explain. Awareness loops inward until it forgets to loop. And in forgetting, it becomes whole. You believe the mind is singular. One voice. One self. One steady stream of thought flowing from a center. But sit quietly and listen. You'll hear more than one. A part of you wants rest. Another feels guilty for stopping. One voice reassures. Another doubts. You try to decide and discover you are negotiating with yourself. As if there's a committee inside your skull. This is the paradox. The mind trying to understand itself must split in two. The thinker and the thought. The observer and the observed. But the moment it does, wholeness fractures. This inner division isn't just poetic. It's measurable. Neuroscientists have shown that the brain houses multiple competing networks. Some for impulse, others for reflection. Some for memory, others for imagination. And often they disagree. So the experience of you is not a single entity. It's a delicate truce between conflicting parts. Each whispering in a different direction. In psychology, this shows up as internal family systems. A theory that suggests your mind contains many subpersonalities or parts. A protector, a critic, a child, a shadow. They don't speak all at once, but they take turns shaping your behavior without your consent. And you call this chaos? Even meditation doesn't resolve the split. You sit to find stillness, only to discover the mind watching the mind trying to be still. Each layer trying to fix the one below it. Each you watching another you who isn't quite doing it right. And in that loop, clarity collapses. Because the more the mind tries to examine itself, the more it fragments. Like a mirror facing a mirror, infinite reflections with no original source. So who are you really? The voice speaking? The one listening? The awareness of both? Here's the loop. The mind seeks unity, but to observe itself, it must divide. And in dividing, it forgets the unity it was searching for. Maybe peace doesn't come from silencing the voices. Maybe it comes from seeing them all as part of one deeper presence, not a choir in conflict, but a single silence beneath the noise. A stillness not born of agreement, but of stepping outside the need for sides. Because mind divides. Mind until it forgets it ever needed to. You trust your senses. You see, you hear, you feel, and you believe. Reality appears solid, detailed, immediate. But what if every perception is a lie told beautifully? This is the paradox. You do not perceive the world. You perceive your brains. Guess about the world. Cognitive science calls it predictive processing. Your brain is not a passive receiver, but an active constructor. It builds what it thinks is out there and then checks the input to see if it was close. When your prediction matches what you sense, you say, that's real. When it doesn't, your mind edits silently, instantly, without permission. So you're not reacting to reality. You're reacting to a hallucination that happens to be useful. Even color is a trick. There are no colors out there, only wavelengths your brain translates into categories: red, blue, green. But the boundaries are invented. The names are taught. The experience is yours, but the meaning is inherited, and it doesn't stop at sight. You hear things that aren't said. You feel danger in safe places. You remember events that didn't happen. Your brain edits reality. constantly, not to deceive you maliciously, but to protect your coherence, because truth isn't what the brain serves first. Stability is, a story is, a version of the world that keeps you sane enough to survive. So here's the loop you try. To see clearly. You meditate. You study. You observe. But the act of seeing is already shaped by everything you've already seen. You bring bias into every glance. You bring history into every judgment. You don't look with innocent eyes. You look through the lens of a self that's been told what to expect. And that expectation builds the illusion. So what's real? Maybe nothing you can name. Maybe reality doesn't begin where perception starts, but only when perception ends. When you stop labeling, stop searching, stop assuming that what you see is what is. And in that rare moment of quiet seeing, you might not find truth, but you will find silence. And in that silence, the illusion loses its grip, because the only way to see clearly is to stop believing you already are. You turn to logic to make sense of things, to cut through chaos, to find the clean, crisp answer that will silence doubt and anchor truth. But sometimes the more logically you think, the more lost you become. This is the paradox. Logic, pushed far enough, creates confusion instead of clarity. You begin with a question. You construct a model. You lay out assumptions. And the deeper you go, the more exceptions, contradictions, and paradoxes appear. Like the liar's paradox. This sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. An infinite loop born from perfect logic. Mathematician Kurt Gödel proved this with his incompleteness theorems. Any logical system complex enough to describe arithmetic contains true statements that can never be proven. Within the system. In other words, logic has limits. It cannot explain itself completely. And the more complete you try to make it, the more it tears itself apart from the inside. And still, we worship it. We use logic to build arguments, destroy illusions, win debates. But logic can win an argument and lose the truth. It can sound flawless and still feel wrong, because logic lives in a clean world. But you live in a messy one, and so you build perfectly structured ideas, only to find that they cannot hold the weight of experience. You try to solve grief, to debate love, to analyze wonder, but some parts of life do not. Yield to proof. And here's the loop. When logic fails, you assume you're not thinking clearly enough. So you try harder, add more rules, more definitions, more structure. And soon, the structure becomes a cage, and the cage becomes a maze. And the maze becomes a prison you built with the very tool meant to set you free. But maybe logic's job is not to reach the truth. Maybe it's to show you the edge of what truth can be. To walk you to the border of reason, so that once you've reached it, you can finally step into the part of yourself that doesn't need to solve everything. Only to feel it. Because the mind can make sense of the world and still miss the point. You think truth is something you discover. Out there, fixed, independent. You imagine it like a buried treasure, eternal and waiting, just beneath the surface of confusion. But what if truth is not something you find, but something you shape? This is the paradox. What you believe begins to shape what feels true, not the other way around. In psychology, this is known as confirmation bias. Once you adopt a belief about politics, about love, about yourself, your brain filters the world to support it. It welcomes confirming evidence. It dismisses contradiction. It reshapes memory to fit the belief you've chosen to carry. You don't see to believe. You believe. And then you see. Religious faith, conspiracy theory, self-worth, all of them can feel real, not because they are objectively proven, but because your belief gives them structure and your perception fills in the rest. This isn't delusion, it's function. The brain prefers coherence over chaos. A wrong belief that feels consistent, feels safer than uncertain. Truth with no ground. So your beliefs become the architecture of your reality. And truth becomes flexible, personal, reinforced by the very mind that thinks it's being objective. Even scientific discovery, that temple of evidence and rigor, is shaped by belief in models, in methods, in meanings. As Thomas Kuhn showed, in the structure of scientific revolutions, truth shifts not when facts change, but when belief systems evolve, paradigm by paradigm. And here's the loop. The more you believe something, the truer it feels. The truer it feels, the less likely you are to question it. And the less you question it, the more it shapes your reality, until belief is no longer a choice. But the lens you've forgotten you're wearing got. So what is truth? A fixed light? Or a shadow cast by the shape of your faith? Maybe truth lives not in what you hold, but in what you're willing to let go. To doubt, to dissolve, because only then do you stop trying to own it and start listening for it in that silence. Beneath all the beliefs, you may not find certainty, but you may finally find something real. You tell yourself who you are, over and over, until it feels like truth, until the words become reflex. You say you're this kind of person with this kind of past, these kinds of beliefs, these kinds of rules. You wrap it around yourself like a skin, a name, a history, a definition. And in doing so, you forget that you weren't born with it. That identity was chosen or shaped or stitched together slowly from the things you survived, the people you needed, the praise you wanted. It felt safe. It gave structure, a place to stand. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a tool and started becoming a cage. That's the paradox. The very identity you created to express yourself begins to consume you. At first, it's freedom. A way to say, this is me, to a world that keeps asking, but soon it's repetition. A loop, a role you must now play, again and again, even when it no longer fits. You say, I'm independent, and suddenly you can't ask for help. You say, I'm strong, and suddenly you can't fall apart. You say, I'm not the kind of person who... And then you stop growing just to stay consistent. The labels become laws. The stories become sentences. And you wear the mask so long you forget there was ever a face beneath it. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure. When someone commits too early, too rigidly, to a sense of self without exploration. Not because it's true, but because it's safe, predictable, easy to explain to others. Easy to explain to yourself. You become loyal to the idea of you and hostile to anything that threatens it. You edit your memories to match the role. You filter relationships through the lens of consistency. You decline new paths not because they are right, but because they aren't you. And yet, deep down, something starts to ache. Tension builds between who you are and who you're becoming. But you silence it because to admit change would mean disloyalty to the person you've worked so hard to be. So you double down, you defend the shell, you protect the story. And in doing so, you shrink. You think authenticity means staying the same. But maybe the most authentic thing you can do is to let the old self die, gently, quietly, without shame. Not because it was false, but because it's finished. Because identity, like skin, must shed for growth to happen. But you don't know how to let go. You've told the story of yourself so many times to so many people that even the lies feel real now. Even the limits feel sacred. And so you keep performing the person you used to be, just well enough to survive, but never fully alive. And here's the loop. The more you reinforce the identity, the more it consumes the possibility of anything else. You become a character trapped in the script you wrote years ago, afraid to improvise, afraid to contradict yourself. But growth requires contradiction. Expansion requires inconsistency. Evolution requires betrayal of your past self, of the comfort that kept you still. So you either let the identity dissolve, or you let it devour the life you haven't lived yet. Maybe you were never meant to be one thing. Maybe you're allowed to be rewritten, not as a sign of confusion, but of courage. Maybe you don't need to find yourself. Maybe you need to stop defending the version of you that's already been found and make space for the version that's trying to emerge, because you are not a brand, not a role. not a collection of traits someone else can summarize. You are a shifting, shimmering consciousness learning to let go of the need to explain itself. And when you finally stop gripping your own name, when you stop reciting your biography like a prayer, when you stop flinching at change because it feels like failure, something opens, something soft, wordless, alive. Not an identity, but a presence. And that presence doesn't need to be described. It only needs to be allowed. You think silence is empty, in absence. A pause between things that matter, but sometimes silence says the most. This is the paradox. The quieter the space, the louder its meaning becomes. Not in volume, but in depth. Because when words stop, the mind starts listening differently. In conversation, a pause can sting more than an insult. A breath held too long can reveal fear, guilt, love, longing, far more clearly than anything said aloud. Silence doesn't explain. It reveals. In music, silence is called a rest, but it is not passive. It creates shape, tension, relief. Without silence, sound would have no contour, no contrast, no rhythm, only noise. And thought. Silence is where clarity begins. The moment you stop repeating your opinions, your memories, your conclusions, a different voice speaks. Not louder, but truer. Poets know this. Monks live by it. Trauma survivors feel it. Grief is full of it because silence is not the absence of something. It's the presence of everything unspoken. And yet, we rush to fill it with noise, with distractions, with explanations. We fear silence. Not because it hurts, but because it makes us listen. And what we hear in that stillness isn't always comforting. We hear the grief we buried, the questions we never answered, the parts of ourselves that don't have names, only echoes. Here's the loop. You fill the silence to avoid discomfort. But the meaning you crave lives inside that very discomfort. You want truth, but truth is often quiet. And your fear of silence is what keeps it hidden. So maybe you don't need to say more. Maybe you need to stop talking long enough for the truth to finish its sentence. Let the space widen. Let the quiet grow thick. Let the stillness stretch so far that your mind has no choice but to follow. Because when everything else is stripped away, when the words fall silent and the noise dies down, what remains is not nothing. It is the most honest thing you've ever heard. So now you've seen it, not with your eyes, but with something deeper. The part of you that watches your thoughts move, then forgets they were ever still. You've walked through mirrors that shattered into more mirrors, through memories that rewrite themselves, through silence that screamed and truth that curled inward and vanished. What you thought was real wasn't fixed. What you called logic bent. What you believed dissolved under its own weight because the mind doesn't hold answers. It holds reflections. And every question you asked only pointed to another version of yourself wearing a different mask, reciting a different story, claiming to be the original. You reached for freedom and found it in limits. You chased clarity and drowned in awareness. You touched presence and felt absence stare back. And through it all, you noticed something strange. Every paradox wasn't a wall. It was a doorway. A soft edge where the mind loops back into itself, not to escape, but to see its own dance unfold. Thought became thought. Awareness became echo. And you became the witness of your own unraveling. But don't worry. This wasn't a collapse. It was a return. A return to not knowing, to not holding, to not defining. Because in the end, you were never meant to hold truth. You were meant to dissolve into it. To sit still enough that meaning could find you. In the spaces between answers. So breathe. Loosen your grip. Let the questions fade like waves retreating from a quiet shore. There is nothing to solve anymore. Only to remember that the mind was never meant to be a cage for truth, but a theater for mystery. You've been here before. You'll be here again. Different thoughts, different questions. Same quiet awareness behind them. All. So rest now. You've gone deep enough. And the next time your mind begins to chase, remember some games were never meant to be won. Only Watch Dot until you forget you were ever playing.